Hi, everybody. Um, Welcome to Conversation with Calvin, We the Species. I'm trying to collate and gather my thoughts because I've been anticipating this interview for a long time. And actually, I've known Gale Weinberg a long time. We're talking decades. Of course, our circles of concentricity. She does things that are different from the things that I did. We're going to discover that about Gail, of course, being a divorce attorney, something of which I don't know really a lot about, although I've been divorced. I guess you know that, Gail. And, both Fran and
I
I,
just learned that.
both Fran and I, before we met, we each had been divorced. Funny, the first question I asked Fran, uh, and even though we're on air now, it's kind of funny. First question I asked when we met in a bar in New York, we sat down. There was chemistry, obviously. I said, "By the way, were you ever married before?" Because for me, that that was important to have someone who'd been through the same kind of journey that I have been through. For me, that was kind of important. Anyway, so I'm with Gail Weinberg, divorce attorney, and she has other messages and things to talk about. The loss of a child. This is kind of heavy stuff. So this is we're here in early February. We're both awaiting, since we're both in Jersey, we're both awaiting snow. Although we haven't had much in 3 years, but we're both awaiting snow. But I'm so grateful, Gail, for you taking the time to do this because it's hugely important. Both things that we're going to talk about, hugely important. Uh, um, so let's. I'm done with my Johnny Carson monologue. It really wasn't that much of a monologue, but so be it. Let's jump into some of your background, and how you wound up as an attorney, and then we'll start talking about stuff.
I just I thought this might be interesting. Both my parents are Holocaust survivors, and it was very important that all three children born of that marriage be educated. It was never even a thought that we weren't going to go to college. So I went to college. I really wanted to go away to school, but my father said I had two choices. I could go to Israel or go to Stern College. He wanted me to be protected because in the early 70s, there was a lot of turmoil on the campuses. So I said, oh my God, I'll never survive Stern College. And I decided to go to Israel. And that's really where I developed uh, what I call a healthy Jewish identity. But the war in 73 came about and the school was going to be closed. I was at Hebrew University and they didn't know when it was going to be opened again because there was active war. So my mom, I was at home for vacation, said, please, please don't go back. I just can't have a child who's in a state of war. So I finished my degree at Brooklyn College. And then I was a psychology and sociology major, and of course, there was nothing I could do after graduating. So I decided that I should get a master's degree, and I went to Teachers College, Columbia, and studied learning disabilities in the special ed program, which I have to tell you, I enjoyed the academics and the curriculum. And I taught for about 7 years, but
Mm.
I found it very frustrating. I loved the children. I was not crazy about the administration. So I did take one administration and supervision course at St. John's University, and then I realized, hey, wait a second, there's not one supervisor that I would like to have lunch with. And I realized that this was not going to work for me. So I also was married for a very short time, and I really did not want to get married again. And I said, "Ooh, I don't think I could afford myself as a teacher." So I decided that I would change careers. and it was a process of elimination. Doctor, too long. MBA, I had to decide whether I would study management or finance. I knew nothing of either one. And then I said, law school. I think I'll do that. So I applied to 3 law schools in Manhattan and one, well, actually 2 in Manhattan and 1 in Queens, St. John's, Brooklyn College, and Fordham. And I was lucky enough to get into all 3, but Fordham was really the best rated school. So I worked during the day and went to school at night and got a law degree from Fordham University School of Law. And my first job actually was in corporate law in real estate, but I didn't find it very challenging because it was very monotonous. You did really a lot of the same things. And I always was very interested in family dynamics and family law. And of course, as a special educator, I worked with families all the time. And I decided I wanted to do family law. And in between, I ended up getting married and needed to relocate to New Jersey. And fortunately for me, I had the New Jersey bar. And there was a New York firm that wanted to open up a site in New Jersey, and I was there to help them with that. So I was actually working in both states. I was working in New York and I was working in New Jersey. I really took a lot of time to educate myself. I took a lot of continuing legal education courses, and I liked family law. It's very interesting. It has a lot of different aspects of law. You have contract law, you have to sometimes deal with trusts and estates, you have tax law, and there's also that little aspect of really being a counselor, not just in law, but helping people through a very difficult time. There's a saying that in family law, you have good people at their worst, and in criminal law, you have bad people at their best. And really, it is very challenging because, you're dealing with a lot of emotion, not just the legal aspect. Because from a legal perspective, I'm just working with, when it comes to financials, the breakup of a partnership, an economic partnership. And that's really a very, for me, a non-emotional project. But then you're dealing with people who, they don't know what their future is going to be like, especially someone who gave up his or her career to raise children and then now doesn't know what their economic future is going to be like. And it's very scary. So, what is interesting is I have found that through the years, and because of the men's rights lobbyists, women have, had a harder time with changes in the law. Just to give you an example, there was a time where when we did child support guidelines, which is a software program, we didn't deduct the alimony from the gross income and then add it to the other party's income. You usually deduct it from the payor, and the payee gets to add it to his or her income. And a lot of times, someone's out of the workforce for such a long time, but yet now we have to do that. We have to consider alimony as something that no longer is available to the payor and is available to the payee. And then we have the Trump tax reform bill where it's no longer deductible to the payor and it's not considered as income to the recipient. And we had to come up with a way to balance the tax impact because still the payor is paying taxes on that income that's going to another person. Also, right now, a lot of males are getting a substantial amount of parenting time, where before it wasn't as common.
Can I ask you something quickly that
Yeah.
comes to mind as you're talking about this? I've watched on the basis of sex probably a dozen times about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. A lot of things that you're talking about, she was unbelievably influential in changing the landscape, uh, correct?
Well,
In trying to balance the books that weren't balanced.
right, but that had more to do with what I would consider federal law
Okay.
and more because family law is state law, and every state is a little different. But I think some people say that the women's rights movement, women's liberation, actually may have hurt women in some ways because there were expectations that not only did they go into the workforce, and a lot of us have achieved a very substantial position, but we also had to take care of children, the house, and some of those responsibilities weren't shared. Although I think, from what I understand, a lot of young couples are much better at sharing their responsibilities. But you know, uh, I always feel bad because I had children, I adopted twins, and I chose to continue my career because I knew if I got out of the workforce, it would be very hard for me to get back in. And that was my choice. However, I know a lot of women who really, there was a decision made that the mother, most of the time, the mother would stay home, raise the children. And then they're married 15, 16, 17, 20 years or more. And all of a sudden there's a divorce, and it's hard to get back into the workforce, even though you may have been on a really positive trajectory as a woman to make a lot of money. You gave it up, and your skills are not as they're not current. You may need to be trained, but yet they decided that we have to impute income, which means that there's an earning capacity that everyone has. The very minimum is minimum wage, and it could be based on your historical earnings, but if it's so far remote from the past, it's very hard to really expect someone to earn that way. And one thing that we do is we have something called an employability expert. And the appellate division said that's the proper way of determining what someone's earning capacity can
Mhm.
be. So I have found that women have really had a harder time as, things change. In fact, we don't call, it used to be permanent alimony. And there's a case called Cruz versus Cruz where they actually said, the appellate division said a 10-year marriage is a long-term marriage. But
Wow.
that's when we only had the ability of uh, permanent alimony and rehabilitative alimony, which means that you will have some years to get trained to get back into the workforce, but it's meant to be temporary. But then we had a new statute that gave us what they call limited duration alimony. Now we have also a new statute that came out in September 2014 that says, really, if you're married 20 years or more, they don't call it permanent alimony, they call it open durational alimony. Why? Because nothing is permanent. You could be disabled, you could lose your job, you could win the lottery, the person who's receiving alimony, or get a substantial inheritance. Or there's retirement. And in that statute, they said that the reasonable retirement age is the federal retirement age, which now could be 67 years. Before it used to be, we kind of thought 65 years, right? And not that you couldn't try to retire before, because it was based on whether it was reasonable to retire at that time. So again, there's that change, 10 years to 20 years. And limited duration alimony, let's say you're married 19 years, you can't get more than 19 years unless there's some very extraordinary circumstances, which we don't see that often. But anyway, it's funny because someone once came to me because I have gotten men custody of their children way before that it was more common for them to get substantial time with their children or even custody. And it really wasn't that I had any magic. It was the facts of the case. And usually, the mother just wasn't as good as the father when it came to parenting ability. So there was no magic, but I used to laugh because they'd come to me and say, I understand that you get custody for men. And I didn't even know my reputation was like that. But anyway, custody is a very interesting part of my practice, uh, only because I always think about the children and the impact of a divorce. Because if you don't really try to work things out where there's less animosity, the children are going to be impacted for a long time. And I always say, if you love your children more than you hate your spouse, you're in a better situation. And honestly, I experienced it myself. Okay. I'm divorced. My kids didn't want to go with their father for many reasons. And I always promoted him because, first of all, they had a right to a father. Second of all, I didn't want a situation where they felt maybe in the future I deprived them of their father. And I wanted them to see that, they have a life despite the divorce. I don't know if I shared this with you, but when I was going through divorce, my son's teacher called me in and said, I have to show you this essay your son wrote. And he wrote, who would ever think that at 9.5 years I would experience divorce? My
Wow.
mother said it has nothing to do with my sister and me. And she said that my life will be just fine, and I trust her.
Wow.
So I must have done something right.
Wow.
And, whatever feelings I had towards him really should not impact them. And that is not something that everyone is able to do or doesn't understand how important it is not to, and like really prevent someone from having a relationship. And I'm just talking about someone who you may not like, but is really not a bad father and not a bad person. I'm not talking about someone who, is just so harmful to the children. That's a different story. So I always, and as an attorney, I do not represent the children. I represent the litigant. But I always try to, talk to them about what I think is, helpful so the children are less impacted. And I know that judges are always looking out for the best interests of the children, less the best interests of the mother and father, but of the children, which I think is wonderful. But that's also not all easily defined. In order to, if it's really conflicted, we get forensic custody and parenting time experts, and they can be very expensive. The whole divorce process can be
Yeah.
expensive.
Which
And
leads me, I have so much stuff in my head. Um, these do-it-yourself divorces, do they work? I mean,
let's
what?
put it this way. If it's simple,
You're right.
right? When I say simple, minimal assets, minimal liabilities. Um, I, I think it can work. We have these online forms in New Jersey courts .com and it's there to help people who want to represent themselves. And if you have a situation where, the two of you can work things out, I think I don't I think it's okay. But if you have a complex case, I don't see how you could really understand the nuances of family law. It's because one of the things that people seem to forget, you don't get special treatment because you're self-represented. You're expected to know the court rules and the law. That's hard, right? I mean, that's why, we're lawyers because we have a certain expertise that other people don't have. So, the one thing is like people sometimes make bad deals, but they have to live with them, right? I always say this isn't a dress rehearsal. You get one chance to do this right. Um, but again, I've seen people who they both represented themselves and it worked. Um, Good for them.
Okay.
Uh, I'm also an attorney who, if I feel someone's not ready for a divorce, I'll let them know. And I'll say, I don't think you're ready. Because I have experience with many clients, when they are ready, they know it. They can't, it just is something that they have to do. And that's fine because it's not my decision whether they get divorced. Now, there are times where I have to give them some guidance, like, if I have a male and they're married for 19 years, I may tell them, that 20-year mark could be problematic for you. It would be wrong for me not to guide them that way, but I'm not the one that says you must file. The only time that I'm really concerned about someone if there's domestic violence and abuse, because, you know, no one should have to suffer that type of existence. Um, but again, it's up to the party person to make the decision whether they want to get divorced or not. Because once you start that action, sometimes it's hard to retract to a relationship, although I have seen people reconcile fine with me. I've seen some of them come back and some of them haven't, and that's okay too.
Okay. Last last legal question. I always wondered, I've never dealt with it on a personal level in my two things, but the institution of prenups, uh, good, bad, it depends on each case.
They're not my favorite,
Okay.
okay, because uh, they have to be fair and reasonable at the time of making, and you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And the weird part about prenups is you're actually planning your divorce before you get married.
Interesting.
And there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it's just a strange situation. But listen, if you have a family business or you have this inheritance and it wasn't earned during the marriage and it wasn't through the efforts of the other spouse, you may want to protect it. Um, but they're not my favorite. And anti-nuptial, which means that you have an agreement after the divorce, after the marriage, excuse me, they're very often subject to challenge. Prenups can be subject to challenge
Yeah.
because you have to make sure that you have disclosed all your assets. Um, I think you should be represented each party and also have time to think about it. Recently, a friend of mine called me up because I know some New York attorneys because first of all, I practiced there for a while. And she said, my doctor asked me about a prenup, but it's in New York and it's horrible. It's horrible. And I said, listen, you're a New Jersey attorney. You really should refer it to a New York attorney. And I gave her the name of some. And she told me subsequently that she told the doctor that she thought it was so horrible. And guess what? They're getting married without the prenup.
Wow.
Interestingly, I had someone who actually called me who was about to get married and asked me how they can protect their assets, which is, you can do that. businesses are harder because if you are continuing to work that business and it's considered an active asset because you're actively engaged, managing, running it, whatever, there's a there's a possibility that the appreciation can be shared. But there are, things that you have to think about. What was the contribution by the
Right.
non-financial spouse? So it
It-
does get a little complicated. You can't protect everything.
right. I was thinking, the two high profile divorces, Bill Gates and Melinda Gates, and Jeff Bezos, and his, I forgot her, Mackenzie, I think. Both these women walked out of that, with tons of billions of dollars, tons of billions of dollars. And I always wondered, was that, as a result of prenups or just would you just said appreciation?
Right.
Yeah, interesting stuff.
And what I find really interesting is because people don't know the law and they get married and there's an inheritance that would normally be exempt if you kept it in a separate account and didn't commingle it. And they just put it in a joint account and it loses its immunity.
uh,
So, but how would they know? And the longer it's there, the harder it is to recoup.
uh-huh. So it loses immunity. That's interesting. Uh, Interesting stuff. All right, taking a deep breath before we move on to um, uh, the next pretty heavy segment. I always like to go off topic. Uh, I didn't even forewarn you on this, but it's one of my favorite questions, which I actually plagiarized from one of my favorite journalists, Barbara Walters, as a matter of fact. So here's the question. You don't have to answer it, but excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
Hmm. It's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Barbara was interesting.
Yeah, I never even thought about something like that. Well, honestly, I would have to say my son.
Sure, sure. Okay. Which is a good segue. Um, which is a good segue about sharing your story. Can you share the story of your son, Michael, and the circumstances surrounding his passing?
So Michael is a twin to Lauren, and I adopted them. Um, interestingly, I didn't know a lot about the family background, and what I knew, I found out to be untrue. Uh, the mother actually said, "Oh, do you use drugs or anything?" And I'm not a drug user. Fortunately, I don't need to rely on substances, alcohol or whatever. And I thought it was interesting that she asked me that and kind of thought that maybe she was anti-drug or substance, although it turned out that the birth father was a functional alcoholic. But I mean, I met them both. They were lovely people. Um, and when a lot of kids experiment with marijuana in high school, right? But if you have a predisposition for addiction, that could be a very dangerous step. And, Michael decided that he, was going to try that and act the first time he got arrested, I'll say, is he was in a car with other kids and they were smoking pot in the town next to me. And here I am thinking, okay, first of all, it's juvenile court because he was 16. And thinking, oh, this kid needs to have some kind of rehab treatment. and I sent him to a program in Paramus called High Focus, and it was probably the biggest mistake I ever made because I didn't have to have that as a requirement. Um, but I thought that, you have a problem, you treat it. And that's where he met other people, other kids
Oh,
who used even worse drugs, right? Heavier drugs. So, Michael was very good at hiding his substance use. And I was in denial for so many years because he went to school, he worked. Um, he was a very, good kid. He wasn't disrespectful. Had a lot of friends. Um, and he went to a military college for 2 years, and they drug test you there. And I thought the discipline would be good. He went to Valley Forge Military College, and you know, he passed. But when during the summer, he of his freshman and sophomore year, he had been taking something called lean. It's like something with cough medicine, and I don't know. And he was in a car accident, and he was seeing a therapist, and she said to me, Michael, you know, he's a drug addict. And every time she would say that, it was like a knife in my heart because I just I just couldn't believe it. But he went to his first residential rehab at the time in Tucson, Arizona, and it was a rehab actually for for the stars and very wealthy people. I didn't select it; it was selected by his therapist, and he went there, and Michael was a star patient. He he won the coffee challenge where his group actually got free coffee because of his efforts. And he was just wonderful. And then they actually wanted him to do some kind of post rehab program, but I wanted him to finish college, and because there was drug testing at Valley Forge, I thought, and a lot of structure too, by the way, I thought that would be a better place. And I think in retrospect, it probably was the wrong thing to do. But again, I was in denial. I didn't understand how difficult a situation he was in. So after 2 years, he has to go to a four-year college, right? So he applied to Drexel and several other, and he was going to study hospitality. Um, and they had a good program. So he went to Drexel, but this was really the first time that he was totally on his own. There was no one there looking after him. And that's when he really started to get into hard drugs. Um, and I still wasn't totally convinced, but after the first semester, he really needed to, well, their quarter semester, after the second quarter semester, he came home and we were trying to decide what to do. And what happened was Drexel's a very expensive school. And I said, he didn't like hospitality. I said, Lauren, Michael, if you don't know what you want, I think it's better for you to go to a state school. So he went to Ramapo College of New Jersey. Um, and looking back and knowing what I know now, I just wish I would have been more knowledgeable. But you can only do what you could do at the time with the knowledge that you have. So again, he was pretty functional, even though he was great at manipulating me. And his therapist, who he stopped seeing, basically said to me after he went to that first rehab, you are enabling him and you're hurting him.
mm.
what parent wants to really hurt a child? And she recommended that I go to AA, Al-Anon actually, and I went. And again, I mean, it's so interesting because I sat there and said, it's not like my son. That's not like my son. And after a while, I just stopped. But what happened was it was COVID, and he started to get worse with his drug use, and I had to finally acknowledge it. And I called up someone who my daughter went to school with, whose daughter went to a program for 6 months, and I asked her whether she could recommend someone, and she recommended a consultant. And he went to this place called Pinelands Recovery. It was like no frills, and believe it or not, he did better there
Wow.
than he did at this. I mean, at this other place, he had Reiki, he had massages, he had a, a chef who was like a five-star chef. Pinelands was just, really getting down to the 12 steps. And they wanted, he needed to go to another program afterwards. And they recommended this place called Surfside Recovery, which was a 6-month program. And Michael did not want to go. But what happened was the counselors were telling him, you are so lucky to be able to go there because people can't afford to go there. And here you have this opportunity. And it was a great place, but he relapsed. The one thing I will tell you, they have a zero tolerance. So you can't stay even a minute after they find out that you used. He drank alcohol, not even drugs, just, and when I say not even drugs, it's still a substance. And he had to leave. So he came home and he was so remorseful. And he kept saying, I should have used my tools. I should have used. So to me, that meant that he learned something at this program. But, he refused to go back because he was embarrassed. And he went, he was still studying and still using. And when he went to Surfside, and right before that, when he went to Pinelands, I finally was able to recognize that this was a real problem. And I participated in the parent program. I then went to Al-Anon. I went to Nar-Anon. I participated in the parent groups. And I really educated myself. So I know a lot about the 12 steps. I read a lot about drug addiction, substance addiction. Taking drugs is just a way to deal with the symptoms. Most of the time, there's something innate that you don't like about yourself, and you don't know how to remedy it through other healthy means. So you numb yourself with these substances. And one thing about Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, they say that you have to detach with love. You have to set boundaries. And I told Michael, I said, Michael, if I find drugs in my house, you can't stay here. And I found a Xanax, and I told him he had to leave. And the next morning was the first time he overdosed. In all the years before, no overdoses, nothing. And, but I felt bad, of course, but I didn't really feel guilty because I didn't put it in his mouth. He went to the hospital. They let him out 2.5 hours later.
Wow. Wow.
And I asked, can't you keep him? Nope. He's not a threat to himself. He's not a threat to society. We're going to let him go. And his father and I went to a diner with him, and we said, you're going to have to go back to rehab. He called Surfside and he asked the clinical director, oh, do you have an accelerated program? He said, no, Michael. So he went back to Pinelands, and then he actually went back to Surfside, and he really did well. He was really committed, and he graduated, got a job. They have a really wonderful program. It's 3 phases based on the steps, but they do a lot of good work. First of all, in the afternoon, there's extreme sports because they're trying to get the serotonin and the dopamine to start working on its own. And also to give them some activities where they can have fun and be sober. And they have to get a job. They get $50 of allowance every month. You don't give them any money. They really become independent. Um, we paid for his insurance only because we wanted him to be able to have good health insurance. But otherwise, he was self-supporting. He was finishing his degree, and he graduated. He went to what they call a sober living home, and he relapsed in June. He graduated in March, relapsed in June. He went back to Pinelands. He was back in the sober house, and he called me up in August. He said, Mom, I have the gene for addiction, and it could kill me.
Mm.
And so I said, I know, you have to be really careful. Um,
Jeez.
October 6th, 2022, he calls me because he called me almost every day. And I said, oh, Michael, I'm out to dinner with a girlfriend. He said, oh, I'm going out to dinner with my friends. I said, okay, call me later or tomorrow. And told me he loved me, which I'm very lucky that I was able to have that last conversation with him. His friends tell me that you would never in a million years think that he was thinking of relapsing. And he decided to buy cocaine and it had fentanyl, and that was it.
Wow. Wow.
Worst day of my life,
Yeah.
October 7th, which is also October 7th has a different meaning in the world also, but that was
Yeah.
a year later.
Wow.
But oop, I don't know what that, I have an alert for something. Um, yeah, it was interesting. You know, you never know the pain of losing a child until you lose it. I don't care what anyone says. No one could say, I know how you're feeling if they haven't experienced it. I compare it to when, you have a child born into your family and you look at this child and it's a love that you've never experienced before. And, I adopted the twins, but that love was so intense. And I love my parents. I love my husband. I love my sibling, but nothing compared to the love for Lauren and Michael. And I tell people that, and they can relate to that if they have children. But until you lose your child, there's no greater pain than that. Because I lost my parents, but that's the natural order of things. You expect it eventually. But it's an experience I wouldn't wish on anybody.
Well, uh, I mean, initial reactions and I listen. You and I have been on similar journeys. If we think about it, the adoption and divorce and really similar. I've been there. Been there, done that. I can't conceive of it, but your initial reactions and or and where'd you go for support? Were there places that helped you and support? Or-
Well, a colleague of mine lost his wife and spoke to me and said, I have an amazing grief counselor. And I worked with her for about 7 months, and it really was very helpful. Um, she gave me books to read. She referred me to this website called grief.com, which is the website for David Kessler. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he's a very well-known grief counselor. I mean, he worked with Winona Ryder because of the death of her mother, Lisa Presley because of the suicide of her son, and many others. He's internationally known. And this is a very interesting anecdote because he's been a grief counselor for many, 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 many years. And he adopted two boys from the foster system. And one of the sons died of an overdose. And he said he wanted to apologize to every patient he had before that time because he never really understood the pain of the loss of a child until then,
Wow.
which is just what I told you.
Yeah.
You have to experience it.
Yeah.
But I also, ironically, there's a woman who lives around the corner from me who has triplets. And 9 days after Michael passed away, her son overdosed also. Now, we weren't really friends, but we connected. I knew her husband better than I knew her. And we went to several bereavement groups, and we go to one every month in a church in Wyckoff, um, which I like a lot. And we went to a conference in Arizona called Helping Parents Heal, which was very, very emotionally draining. And, you see so many parents who lost children to so many different types of situations. Uh, Death by suicide, death by illnesses, overdoses, car accidents, all kinds of things. And you don't feel so alone, really. But one of the things I really was able to recognize was I met some parents whose children overdosed like 7, 8 years ago. And fentanyl was not in the product at all. It was usually heroin. And now, if you really, a lot of the overdoses um, of children from like 19 to 35. I wouldn't even call 35 a child, but people uh, who use substances like drugs, that's fentanyl death. There was 100 and I think it's 102,000 deaths in 2022.
Yeah.
And Jelly Bean was testifying before Congress, and he said, just imagine having people in a plane, and every day 300 people were dropped to the ground and exited without a parachute. That is what that 102,000
Wow.
represents. It's gotten better, but I mean, I don't want to be political, but I think Biden's decision to open the border was probably the most destructive act. And he did it as a reaction to Trump. But what happened, fentanyl just came into this country and destroyed so many lives. And I do blame him partially. I can't blame him entirely because my son decided to do it, right? So I can't, but I really believe that if the border was more under control, we would have saved a lot of lives. So, that's just how I feel. And I'm not really a political person, uh, but I'm glad that the number of deaths from fentanyl they're reducing. So that's a good thing. Um, but still, my son was caught in that statistic.
Mm. Um, in what ways do you remember? Do you honor Michael, I'm sure that's part of your life. I can feel it.
Oh, well, I have a scholarship for him at Ramapo College through the recovery program, which Michael was not a part of. But every year I give a scholarship to someone who has been sober for 9 months, has good academic standing. I prefer the business school because Michael was a business major. And by the way, Ramapo College of New Jersey gave him his degree. He was short just a few classes, and they really honored him.
Wow.
It was beautiful. And every year I get letters of, from the recipient of the college, and really makes me feel so good that I'm able to help somebody. And that's something to honor Michael, right? Um, I'm always willing to help someone who's gone through this tragedy. I just spoke to someone whose son passed in December, and she has a Facebook post, and she likes to post things about her son. And I wrote, I know exactly how you feel. And I lost my son October 22, and we connected. And I bought her some books that helped me. And I do that with a lot of people. I send them books that could help them. I also have every other Sunday, two of two guys who went to Surfside died after Michael due to drug overdoses. And we have a Zoom call every other Sunday and help each other.
Right.
And everyone is in a different place. I mean, one woman is struggling more than I am, and the other woman, but one woman lost her only son. And she said to me, I'll never be able to be called mom again.
Right.
And, her husband's a psychologist, wasn't able to save the son, you know. And that's the one thing you realize you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. That's a slogan from Al-Anon. And it's true. No matter what I did, and I did a lot, I would have done anything to help Michael. And it didn't matter. It was a decision that he made, and it was his fate. But I feel, and this does help me, that we all have an expiration date. We don't know when it is. It was time for Michael. He fulfilled his purpose in the world, and uh, God needed him more than I did. Uh, so, I have a picture of him on my dresser, and every morning I'll say, you know, I'll tell him how much I love him. But there are days where I actually yell at him. I said, why? Why'd you make that decision? But you know what? In the Jewish religion, we have this saying, may his memory be a blessing. And I have such wonderful memories of Michael. And the one thing that people don't really understand, a lot of people don't want to talk about your son because they think it's going to hurt you. But the truth is, I love talking about Michael. I love it when people tell me, oh, I was thinking about Michael. Recently someone said to me, oh, I was with one of Michael's high school friends, and he said that he'll look at pictures and think of Michael. What a wonderful thing for
Yeah.
me to hear, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Michael he was such a sweetheart of a kid. And you know what? He left the world with a lot of people loving him, and he knew he was loved. And I think I told you this, he had this book that he worked in his recovery program, and they asked him, did you ever feel pure love? Me and this girl that who he went to high school and really loved very much. And to have that as a memory is such a wonderful thing. But so I really focus on, all these good things.
You said something that resonated with me. You have that picture of Michael on your dresser. I'm looking at a picture of my mother. It's been there for 20 plus years. So she looks at me. Um, I'm trying to give you a spiritual little tidbit. So my mother looks at me for the last 20 plus years, smiling, and it's 1941 before the war. I was very close with my mother, close with my father, but really close with my mother. But a series of spiritual things happened, and I think I might have mentioned this to you when we talked a couple of weeks ago. But I just felt, a few years ago, I just wanted to be close to my mother because I miss her, and she was such an influence in my life. Though I found a particular song she liked. It was Mary Alonso singing "Only a Rose" opera. So she would listen to that back in the 50s in Newark, all day long. And, I'd run out of the house just to get the hell out of the house because but now, so I found that song and I listened to it actually for 3 days here. Only a rose again and again because I guess I'm OCD until the voice from the kitchen, that voice from the kitchen told me to stop effing listening. And I stopped because she had had enough. And then a couple years later, I went through the same thing. Uh, um, I I just felt like I wanted to be close to my mother and listening to that song, which she loved. So it did the same thing for a couple of days, and of course the voice from the kitchen, yelled, "Stop effing," and I stopped. And then a couple of days later, and I was at the tail end of writing my novel. I always show it. There's a tortoise in my hair, a journey to spirit. It's a spiritual thing. At the tail end, I hit the wall. I couldn't write. I couldn't write. I just had a block, and that particular day, I was texting with a friend of mine, a new friend from LinkedIn, Gaetano, and we were going back and forth, and I had my phone here. I mean, this is really powerful stuff. I had my phone here, and he asked me a question, and I typed "yup," and I sent it off to him, and I put the phone down. And then 15 minutes later, we all are so conditioned now, like Pavlov. I just picked up my phone to hold it, and there, typed, but it was never sent, was the word mom. And the goosebumps, Gail, went up and down my arms. And I'm fairly techie. There is no way in the world that that could have gotten typed. So, I told it, to Fran and stuff. And I asked a million people I know, how does it, I don't have voice activation. So the good news for me is my mother got permission from somebody up there to step out and type mom to let me know she's there. And
That happened to my friend whose son passed away 9 days after Michael. She was actually going to court because they found, well, they couldn't charge the person with drug distribution, but the person stole his jewelry and car, and he and this other kid, and actually put it on social media. Think about that. And as she was going to the courthouse, she gets this text that says "mom." And it's the same experience. And, helping parents heal, there are a lot of mediums there, and they talk about near-death experiences. And apparently, they may leave the body, the spirit goes up, but they're always with you, always with you. I have this beautiful bracelet that two people in my office gave me for the holiday, and in it is a picture of Michael hugging me if you put it up to the light.
well,
So
cool.
I never take it off now. I mean, I do when I take a shower, but I wear it every day because this keeps him close to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And believe it or not, whenever I have it, I do much better on my motions.
Wow, that's funny.
So, I really, people say to me, "You're so strong. You're so," I don't know. I don't think about that really. Um, I have resilience. That's what the grief counselor said to me. You're a very resilient person. And, I've been through a lot too. I had two cancers, right? Thankfully, I'm in remission. It's been a little over 11 years. Um, and I have a lot to be grateful for, which is another way I cope. I cope because I focus on the good things in my life. And I have a lot of good things and a lot of things that I can say I'm grateful. I mean, I have really been lucky I love what I do. I am fortunate to have been able to make that transition. It's when I was applying to law school and I got in, and the vice principal of Bayside High School said to me, "Oh, I also went for a PhD, but look at me now." And I said, "Well, you know what the difference between you and me? I don't look back. I always go forward." And, someone said I have courage. I don't even think about it. If I'm lucky that I've been able to execute a lot of the things that I wanted to execute. I'm not perfect. I'm not 100% able to do everything, but I'm determined. And I have Lauren is my daughter, and she's now doing a master's in social work at Rutgers.
Right. You told me that.
And she said she's getting hundreds in her
That's great.
assignments.
That's
And
great.
she thanked me for giving her a good work ethic.
That's great.
Yeah. So I wish her the best. And she doesn't have as much life experience as I do. So dealing with the death of her twin brother is in many ways harder. But we give her a lot of support. And, when it's their birthday, I really make it about her and not about him. I make it about him on the anniversary of his death.
Right.
We talk about spirituality. I went to the cemetery on October 7th, and I didn't tell my daughter I was going, and she works, so I thought she would not be there. And I'm in front of the graveside, and she says, "Mom," and she
Wow.
came, and
Wow.
we were there. Um, she's a real character. She puts stuff around she has a disco ball. She's got all this stuff. Her father didn't like it. I said, "This is her way of grieving. Let her just be." So, I think we're doing okay as a family.
And with that, this is a perfect way to close. I think
Okay.
I think this is a perfect way to close. This has been for me just to listen to you on both, on both fronts, and again our commonalities, and which makes me, it's like a bonding thing. Your journey has been part of my journey, and so I understand a lot of these things, and I'm so grateful that you took the time because you're busy,
Yeah.
to share
Well,
this
I'm
stuff.
I'm happy to do it. I'm fond of your family, and um, I always considered your family like my family,
Correct.
and I've been lucky. Your sister-in-law Lois and I have been friends for such a long time, and the Weinsteins are also part of my life, which
Sure.
is nice. So and I love seeing how everyone is maturing. Your son with his two kids, and
Yeah.
you know, it's interesting because I'll just end want to say one thing. Some people say, when you see people moving on in their life and your son is not going to have that, it doesn't bother me. I am happy for other people. I just, you know what? It has nothing really to do with Michael. So I'm happy that everyone is moving on in a positive way and hopefully less, everyone has hardships, but less hardships and better times.
Right.
Thank you for letting me share
Oh
my,
no, this was wonderful. Hey, I told you before, I sit in this chair 12 hours a day. I'm always here. I wear out chairs literally. They're in the garage now. I wear out arms and legs, and Fran tries to fix it. And so I'm here, and anytime you want to come back and chat about stuff, because I think it's endless, the things that we can talk about. You can talk about your experiences. It's funny, I interviewed yesterday, preliminary, a woman who wrote a book um, uh, called A Purposeful Marriage.
ah,
Yeah, because it's funny. It just worked out. I don't plan this stuff. People come to me and I interview them. Her name is Wanda Webster Stansberry, and she did a lot of work in Trenton and giving back to the community and so she and her husband wrote a book, How to Stay Married for 53 Years.
wow.
So we talked just preliminarily yesterday, and I kind of read through I read through the book and took some notes, and then the light bulb went off, and I said, "Gee, I'm going to be with Gail tomorrow." And what perfect synergy, you know? She did tell me something interesting. She said, according to her, 70% of second marriages don't work out. Is that right?
Yeah, they're more likely to not work. But you know what? People are less afraid to file for divorce. They've been through it. So they're not as scared, I think. And if
Uh-huh.
you're, I think relationships they're very challenging and you have to, I always said, if you have the same values, you're in a better situation than if you don't. And you have to have respect because people ask me, what makes a good marriage? And even though I've been divorced twice, I have an idea. I have a sister who's been, let's see, she's married 51 years, or maybe even more. Wait, yeah, 51 years. My parents were married 45 years, and my brother's married 44 years.
Wow.
And, you know, I just, I wished I could have stayed married, but it was too difficult. And honestly, for me, it was the best decision.
Sure.
Um, and again, if I didn't have my career, I may not have been able to make that step, and my life would have turned out to be very different.
Perfect. Done.
Okay,
Don't leave. I'm just going to stop recording. This has been absolutely great, Gail. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Don't leave. I'm just going to stop
okay.
recording.